Adrian DeLuca adjusted the cuff of his navy wool coat as he stepped into the narrow aisle of the packed commercial flight from Seattle to Boston. It was a red-eye, and he hated red-eyes. More than that, he hated flying commercial. His private jet sat grounded in Seattle with mechanical issues, forcing him into this unfamiliar world of overhead bins and numbered seats. Row 18C, window. He moved past a couple arguing about luggage space and slipped into his seat, letting out a slow breath as he sank into the fabric. The hum of engines preparing for takeoff filled the cabin, but it did nothing to quiet the static in his head after a relentless week of negotiations conducted in rooms where words were chosen carefully and silence carried weight. Adrian looked every bit the man he was. Tailored slacks in the charcoal, sleek leather shoes, a watch that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. But his face told a different story. The lines around his dark eyes, the tension in his jaw, the subtle heaviness in his shoulders. He looked like a man carrying burdens no amount of money could lift. He pulled a folded newspaper from the seat pocket, but his eyes skimmed the words without processing them. His mind was already elsewhere, drifting toward the city he'd left behind and the one waiting ahead. Then came the shuffle of small feet. A little girl no older than 3 appeared beside him wearing a bright pink dress and carrying a green turtle-shaped backpack almost as big as she was. Her eyes were wide with the kind of wonder only children possessed. "That's our seat, Mommy. Look, it has a window." She clambered into the middle seat with pure excitement, her small shoes kicking lightly against the seat in front. Adrian offered a polite nod and turned to the window, hoping silence would be enough. Then came the voice, soft and curious. "You look tired, sir." Adrian turned slightly. The girl was looking up at him with big, sincere eyes. Her tone wasn't mocking, just genuinely concerned in the way only children could be. He cleared his throat. "Fine." She didn't seem convinced, but said nothing more, just smiled faintly and settled in, swinging her legs as she dug into her backpack. To his surprise, she didn't fidget or whine. She simply looked around in quiet fascination, fingers clutching the straps of her bag. Adrian glanced at her again. She had soft blonde curls that bounced as she moved, cheeks round with youth. Her dress was rumpled from travel, but clean. A small stuffed bunny peeked from her backpack's zipper. In the aisle seat, her mother had already fallen asleep, head tilted to the side, wavy blonde hair falling over her shoulder. Her features were soft, but exhausted. She looked young, too young for the weariness etched in her face. Her arms were folded protectively over her purse, breathing deep with the kind of sleep born of complete exhaustion. The girl looked at her mother, then back at Adrian. She held out something, half a chocolate chip cookie wrapped in a napkin. "For you," she said simply. He blinked. "No." Her brow furrowed slightly. "You can have it. I have more." Adrian hesitated. Something in her open, unbothered expression made it hard to refuse. He took the cookie. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled like that one word made her entire day. He took a bite. Sweet, crumbly, simple. The plane began to taxi and the lights dimmed. Adrian leaned back, closing his eyes. Beside him, the girl adjusted herself, leaning her head against the armrest and hugging her stuffed bunny. Her mother remained asleep, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Adrian opened his eyes once more, glancing at the small figure beside him. A strange warmth settled in his chest, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. For the first time in a long while, someone had looked at him and seen him. Not his name, not his reputation, not the careful distance he maintained. Just a tired man. And that someone was a little girl with a green backpack who thought strangers were just friends she hadn't met yet. The cabin lights dimmed further as the flight cruised above the clouds. Adrian sat still, his shoulder bearing the slight weight of the sleeping child. Sophie's tiny head had found its way to his upper arm after she'd handed him that half cookie. He hadn't had the heart to move her. Outside, the world had vanished into darkness, pierced only by scattered lights glowing like distant memories. The woman in the aisle seat stirred, her head lifting slowly. She blinked, disoriented, then realized her daughter was no longer beside her. "Sophie," she said, voice hushed but sharp with worry. Adrian gestured for silence, then pointed to the girl asleep against him. "She's safe." The woman exhaled deeply, her shoulders sagging, One hand went to her chest, then reached to touch her daughter's back, just to be certain. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep. I must have been more tired than I thought. Adrian shook his head slightly. She's good company. She pushed back some tousled blonde hair and gave him an apologetic smile. Soft, a little embarrassed. I just finished 3 overnight shifts. Got off work at 5 this morning, came straight to the airport. Thought I could stay awake. He glanced at her, really looked. Young but weary, eyes lined from sleepless nights, faint circles beneath them. But her voice was warm, and the way she gently rubbed Sophie's back said more than words. Nurse? He asked. Assistant. Temporary position. He nodded, then looked down at Sophie, who shifted slightly in her sleep, a faint smile on her lips. She offered me half a cookie earlier. The woman, Elena, smiled with a hint of pride. She does that when she thinks someone needs cheering up. She's observant. Adrian glanced at the crumbs still in his hand, then at Sophie. She was right. Elena tilted her head as if trying to read his tone, but said nothing. I'm Elena, by the way. Adrian, thank you for watching her. Not everyone's patient with kids. She's easier to be around than most adults I know, he said, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. Elena's expression softened. She sees people, sometimes better than adults do. Adrian looked toward the window. Maybe that's because she hasn't learned how to look away yet. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Outside, the plane soared above a sea of clouds, the sky vast and black. Adrian closed his eyes, letting the hum of engines drown his thoughts. But the image of that tiny hand offering him half a cookie wouldn't leave. By the time the plane landed in Boston, the moment had passed. Adrian disembarked with purpose, his usual controlled stride returning. No words were exchanged, just a glance back at the tired woman and the sleeping child with the green backpack. But as terminal lights blinked overhead and the crowd swept him away, Adrian couldn't shake the quiet feeling that something inside had shifted. Boston greeted him with drizzle and gray skies. A black Cadillac waited at the curb, Rocco standing beside it with an umbrella. The large man's presence was silent but solid, as it had been for 15 years. Adrian barely noticed the chill as he slid into the back seat. Home, he said quietly. Rocco nodded once and pulled into traffic. They drove in familiar silence through streets where Adrian's influence ran deeper than most knew. Past the financial district where legitimate businesses bore names he controlled. Past neighborhoods where his word carried weight that had nothing to do with paperwork. The townhouse in the West Village was all stone walls and iron gates, a converted brownstone that felt more like a fortress than a home. Inside, amber light from old sconces cast long shadows across dark wood floors. Family photographs lined the walls, old pictures of his grandfather, the man who'd built the foundation Adrian now stood upon. Pictures of his parents, taken before the fire that had claimed them both. Adrian poured himself one drink, as he always did, and stood by the tall window overlooking the city. The lights glittered below, but none of it reached him. It never had. His eyes dropped to a photo frame on a low shelf. Dust clung to the edges. He hadn't touched it in 5 years. Emily, his wife, the woman who'd loved him before everything else, before the weight of his name became both armor and burden. They'd been married 10 months before a rainy night, a driver who ran a red light, and a phone call that shattered everything. He'd buried her in the fall. The leaves were red that day. She would have loved that. Since then, life had become efficient. Meetings, arrangements, expansion. No distractions, only responsibility. Especially now with his mother's health fading. Donor lists, blood types, risk assessments filled every conversation. He visited, signed forms, asked questions, then went back to work. It was how he survived. Structured emptiness. But for the first time in 5 years, something had broken the rhythm. And it had started with a girl in a pink dress in a green backpack offering him half a cookie with hands too small to understand what kindness meant to someone who'd forgotten how to receive it. The scent of antiseptic hit Adrian the moment he stepped through the sliding glass doors of the hospital. Cold, clean, clinical. He passed the reception desk with a quiet nod and took the elevator to the 6th floor, where his mother had been admitted for another round of tests. The hepatology wing was quiet, the kind of silence filled with muted beeping and tired footsteps. Adrian tucked his hands into his coat pockets as he turned a corner toward the nurse's station. He'd come to check on donor updates, but as he walked down the hall, a familiar voice caught his attention. "Okay, Mr. Donovan, slow and steady. We've got all the time in the world." "Wish you all the time in the world." He glanced toward the sound. A young woman in scrubs was gently helping an elderly man with a walker. She walked beside him, voice calm and patient. It took him half a second to recognize her. The wavy blonde hair, the quiet strength in her voice, the eyes warm but tired. Elena. He stopped without meaning to. She didn't see him at first, her focus completely on the patient, steadying his grip, adjusting his oxygen line. But then Sophie appeared from around the corner, waddling toward them with unmistakable glee. "Uncle Airplane," she squealed. Adrian blinked. Sophie ran straight to him and wrapped her arms around his legs with surprising force. Her little pink shoes squeaked on the hospital floor. Adrian crouched slightly, caught between amusement and disbelief. "Hey there!" Elena turned quickly at the sound, her eyes widening. She froze for a split second, caught between shock and embarrassment. "You," she breathed, then recovered. "Hi." Adrian stood, nodding. "Elena, I didn't expect to see you here. Are you visiting someone?" "My mother. She's being evaluated for a transplant. I come in a few times a week." Elena nodded, understanding settling in her expression. "I see." They stood in awkward silence before she motioned to the elderly man. "I should get Mr. Donovan back to his room." Adrian stepped aside. "Of course, Vim." But Sophie clung to his leg again. "Wait, Mommy, can he come too?" Elena sighed gently. "Honey, he's busy." "It's fine," Adrian said, surprising himself. He walked with them as Elena helped Mr. Donovan back into bed. She was gentle but efficient, and Adrian observed her with quiet curiosity. Once the patient was settled, she turned back to him and Sophie, who was now in a visitor chair playing with the stethoscope dangling from her mother's pocket. "You work here?" he asked. Elena nodded. "Night shifts mostly, sometimes mornings if someone calls in sick." "You're not registered?" Her lips tightened slightly. "Not officially. I was in med school, Harvard." Adrian's brows lifted fractionally. "That's impressive." She gave a small, dismissive shrug. I dropped out second year. Things got complicated." His eyes flicked to Sophie. Elena followed his gaze and nodded. Yeah, her father wasn't part of the plan. Neither was raising a child alone, working two jobs, barely scraping by. She didn't sound bitter, just tired, honest. Adrian's voice softened slightly. "That's a lot." "It is what it is. I'm not ashamed, but this isn't where I thought I'd be." She paused, then added almost under her breath, "This is just temporary. I used to dream of being a surgeon." Her eyes flicked up to his, and for a second Adrian didn't know what to say. He only knew he understood. Dreams left behind, plans rewritten by loss. He saw her in a new light now, not just as Sophie's mother, but as someone who had carried broken dreams with grace and kept moving forward. And something shifted in him again. Maybe fate didn't come with grand announcements. Maybe it just walked quietly beside you in scrubs and sneakers, holding a little girl's hand. The days following their unexpected reunion passed in quiet rhythms. Adrian found himself visiting the hospital more often, not just for his mother's updates, but because something about that hallway lingered. Elena never asked for anything. She moved through her shifts with steady focus, caring for patients, for Sophie, for keeping everything from falling apart. But Adrian noticed things. The medical textbooks she read during breaks, old and worn. Notes scribbled on napkins and scraps. The way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. One afternoon, he left a small package at the nurse's station. Inside were two pristine anatomy reference books, highlighted and bookmarked like new. No note, no signature. The next morning, she found him waiting outside the coffee stand in the lobby. "You left those, didn't you?" He shrugged. "They were sitting on my shelf." She smiled, quiet and hesitant. "Thank you." It became a pattern. Arian made calls, arranged a meeting with a retired Harvard professor under casual pretense. No promises, No pressure. Elena didn't protest, but she never asked for more. Meanwhile, Sophie grew fond of him. She insisted on calling him Uncle Star after Elena told a bedtime story about stars guiding people home. Each evening, Sophie video called him to say goodnight. Adrian, who once ignored personal calls entirely, now set reminders so he wouldn't miss them. He listened to her sing off-key cartoon songs, watched her show off drawings of Dr. Mommy, and once even wore a crown she'd made from napkins and tape. Her affection disarmed him completely. It melted barriers he'd thought were permanent. Still, Adrian kept his distance from Elena. He never reached for her hand, never lingered too long in her gaze, because deep inside, guilt still sat in his chest like a stone. One evening, returning to the hospital after a late meeting, Adrian passed the staff break room. The door was ajar. Inside, Elena sat on a bench in her scrubs, hair a little messy, shoes kicked off. Sophie lay curled in her lap, fast asleep in her pink dress, green backpack on the floor. Elena hummed softly, rocking slightly, arms wrapped around her daughter. She looked exhausted but peaceful. Adrian stood there for a lucky moment, unnoticed. Then quietly he stepped inside. Without a word, he removed his coat and gently draped it over her shoulders. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. "I didn't mean to wake you." She blinked, registering his presence. "I must have dozed off. I was waiting for her to settle." He crouched beside them. "I'll sit with her. You rest." She looked at him, tired, surprised, grateful. Then, too weary to resist, she leaned back and closed her eyes. Adrian sat on the floor beside them, legs crossed, arms resting on his knees, watching Sophie's quiet breathing. A few minutes later, an older nurse passed the doorway and stopped. She looked at the scene, Elena sleeping under Adrian's coat, Sophie in her arms, Adrian on the floor, and smiled, a deep, knowing smile. "No one has ever done that for her," she said softly. Adrian said nothing, but something inside him twisted and softened all at once. And for the first time in years, he allowed a thought to come clear and terrifying. Maybe he didn't want to be alone anymore. Adrian sat in the back room of a restaurant he owned, late evening shadows stretching across dark wood paneling. A laptop glowed on the table before him, displaying information his people had gathered. He hadn't meant to look into Elena's background so thoroughly. But ever since their conversation, her soft whisper, "I used to dream of being a surgeon," had stayed with him. He'd made a call, discreet inquiries. Within hours, he had her history. An application to Hawthorne Memorial, a private hospital his family had financial interest in, dated nearly 2 years ago, marked rejected. Insufficient credentials, background inconsistency. Adrian's jaw tightened as he read the notes. Left Harvard Med in year 2, single mother, no references. The decision had been processed without nuance, without context. A rubber-stamped dismissal. He sat back, rubbing his temple. This was partially his world, his influence. And a woman like Elena, qualified, capable, trying, had been dismissed without conversation. The next day, Adrian made arrangements. Quietly, a new program for medical candidates who'd paused their education. No press, no announcements, just a fix, starting with Elena. He didn't tell her, but the news found her anyway. She showed up at his office 2 days later, her face pale, jaw tight. "You went through my file." No greeting, no smile. Adrian stood slowly. "Elena, you thought I wouldn't find out? That I'd just say thank you and feel grateful?" He took a breath. "I was trying to make it right." Her eyes burned. "By what? Pulling strings? You think I want pity?" "No, because you deserve a fair shot, and you didn't get one." "I don't need saving, Adrian." He stepped toward her. "I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to fix things." She backed away. "I trusted you, but this feels like control." Adrian watched her walk out. That night, the world felt colder again, until his phone rang just after midnight. Sophie's name flashed on the screen. When he answered, he heard coughing, then Elena's panicked voice. "Sophie's burning up. 103.7. I can't get her fever down. I don't know what to do." "I'm coming, I am," Adrian said without hesitation. He was out the door in minutes. When he arrived at Elena's modest apartment, she looked more shaken than he'd ever seen her. Sophie lay flushed on the couch, cheeks red, eyes glassy. Adrian took one look and scooped the little girl into his arms. Hospital. Now. Elena didn't argue. Hours later, Sophie rested in a pediatric room, fever finally dropping. Elena sat beside her, head in her hands, silent. Adrian pulled up a chair. I'm sorry, I should have asked first. I should have trusted that you'd want to fight your way back on your own terms. She nodded slowly, tears brimming. I've spent so long doing everything alone. I didn't know how to let someone help without feeling small. He looked at her directly. You're not small, Elena. You're the strongest person I've met. She turned to him, eyes full of something fragile. And for the first time since Emily, Adrian reached out slowly, deliberately, and took someone's hand. The hospital room was quiet except for soft beeping and the hum of filtered air. Adrian sat beside the bed, staring at the frail figure lying under white sheets. His mother, Irene DeLuca, had always been a force, sharp-witted, fiercely independent. But now her skin was pale, her frame thinner, breathing more labored. The doctor's voice from earlier echoed in his mind. We're running out of time. We need a match soon. Adrian had spent 2 weeks making calls, pulling every connection he had. But matches were rare, especially for her blood type. He felt helpless, and Adrian DeLuca never felt helpless. That evening, Elena approached quietly in her scrubs. Adrian, he looked up. I did the test, she said. He blinked. What test? She sat beside him. The blood match, for your mother. Adrian straightened. Elena. I'm compatible. His breath caught. No, absolutely not. I'm healthy. I already spoke with the transplant team. I'm eligible. No, he repeated, voice harder. You're not doing this. She needs a donor, Adrian. Not you. You have a donator, a life. This is too dangerous. I know the risks. He stood, pacing. You don't owe me this. You don't owe her this. She stood too. She needs help, and your mother gave you life. I won't let you risk yourself. She stepped closer. You don't get to make that decision for me. Adrian looked at her then, really looked. The fire in her eyes, the calm certainty. She wasn't doing this out of guilt. She was doing it out of compassion. You think I could live with myself if something happened to you? He said, voice cracking for the first time in years. Elena's expression softened. She placed a hand on his chest. She gave you life. Let me help give her a second one. She paused. You've already given me mine. For a moment, neither spoke. He closed his eyes, forehead pressing gently against hers. You shouldn't have to do this. I want to. Later that night, Adrian stood at his mother's bedside, holding her thin, cold hand, and for the first time in a long time, he prayed. Morning light filtered through hospital windows when Irene DeLuca opened her eyes. Adrian stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. Her gaze was clearer than it had been in months. You're here, she murmured, and you made it through. Her eyes drifted to Elena standing quietly in the doorway. Irene reached out a weak hand. Elena took it. My brave girl, Irene whispered. Elena laughed gently, eyes glistening. I'm just glad you are okay. You saved my life. Then looking at Adrian, and his too. Later that afternoon, Adrian asked Elena and Sophie to meet him in the hospital's children's playroom. Sophie skipped ahead in her pink dress, green backpack bouncing. Nathan was already waiting. When Elena entered, confused, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a small napkin. I was thinking about the moment everything changed for me. He unwrapped it. Half a chocolate chip cookie. Elena stared. This isn't the original, he said with a slight smile. But I never forgot it. She raised an eyebrow, a small smile forming. That flight, that night, I was empty. Then this tiny girl handed me a broken cookie like it was the most important gift in the world. He took a breath, and then she gave me you. Adrian knelt on one knee holding up the cookie. I don't have a ring yet, but I have this, a promise, a beginning. Elena Brooks, will you marry me? Elena covered her mouth, laughing through tears. With a cookie? He grinned slightly. It worked the first time. Sophie clapped, then ran over and threw her arms around Adrian. Now you're not tired anymore, huh? Adrian hugged her tightly, voice thick. No, sweetheart, you woke me up. Elena knelt beside them, and together they stayed there in a room filled with tiny chairs and bright toys. What started at 30,000 feet had brought them all to this moment, and it all started with a cookie. Late afternoon sun bathed the backyard in golden light. Leaves and amber and rust drifted from maple trees surrounding the house. Laughter echoed from the garden where balloons danced. Sophie's fourth birthday. She dashed through grass in her pink dress, green backpack bouncing, tiara slightly crooked. By the porch, Elena set down cupcakes. Her hair in a loose braid, she looked brighter, less tired. Months from finishing her medical degree, Adrian stepped out with a gift wrapped in glittery pink paper. In a navy sweater, sleeves pushed up, he looked more at ease than anyone could remember. Inside, Irene helped Sophie frost cupcakes, her movements steady, face warm with color. As sun dipped low, they gathered around a cake with 4 candles. They sang. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut and blew them out. Adrian leaned in. "What did you wish for?" Sophie grinned. "Cake for breakfast tomorrow." He laughed. Dangerous thinking. Later, as twilight settled and guests left, Adrian and Elena sat on the back steps watching Sophie chase fireflies. "I still can't believe this is our life," Elena said softly. He nodded. "I know." She rested her head on his shoulder. "We almost missed it." "But we didn't," he replied, wrapping his arm around her. Sophie ran across the lawn, green backpack bouncing, pink dress catching the breeze. She turned and waved. "Come on, slowpokes," Adrian smiled. That little girl who'd once handed him half a cookie at 30,000 feet had handed him something more. A reason to live again, to love again, to come home. And that's how a simple moment on a plane changed 3 lives forever.